The Dominator of the Universe, Sai Itoshi, versus the Blue Rose of Armageddon, Michael Kaiser, versus the Defender of Creation, Don Lorenzo. The ultimate matchup between the best of what the U20 category can offer. The ultimate striker versus the ultimate midfielder versus the ultimate defender. And so you already know it, baby. We are going to look at each player's stats, abilities, and explore their best feats in order to determine who is the winner of this legendary matchup. Michael Kaiser, the German Emperor, the new Gen 11 striker, and the character that single-handedly carried Blue Lock's biggest arc, the Neo-Egoist League. Because you see, ever since his introduction, he was one of the most hyped up characters in the U20 category. And while at first things were bumpy, at the end of the PXG game, Kaiser not only did he live up to the hype, he actually far exceeded it. Because to me, Kaiser is one of the best written characters in the show. In fact, I think his character twist is second only to Noah in the Neo-Egoist League, which is actually saying a lot considering how much I idealize Noah. But here's the kicker. Kaiser managed to live up to the hype with only few weapons, which is kinda ironic and funny at the same time. He is the exact opposite of Isigi, and I mean it makes sense, and we will get to that in a second. But first, before all of that, as you all know, we gotta start with his physical stats. And immediately I gotta admit, I've always said that Kaiser is rather weak. I mean, I derived that from his muscle mass. However, after rereading the Neo-Egoist League few times, I noticed that Kaiser is one of the strongest players in the show. Which is very interesting in this case because this strength is not due to his muscle mass, because as I said, he is very average at that, but rather it is due to how aggressive Kaiser is, kinda like how it is with Shido. I mean, don't get me wrong, Kaiser is no Kunigami or Baro or even close to that. However, I truly believe he is only second to those two players and possibly Rio. I mean, as I said, he might not look that beefy, however, he packs quite the punch. Enough to allow him to not only contend with the likes of Shido, Karasu, Tokimitsu, but even take Rin on a ride in his berserker state. And we all know how much of a specimen Rin is, especially when he is engulfed in the berserker state. And so Kaiser not only being able to contend with him, but rather beat him in a physical altercation is a very powerful testament to how strong Kaiser is. And I mean, even beyond that, him actually being able to hold both Karasu and Tokimitsu and still shoot the ball is rather impressive. I mean, sure, Tokimitsu might have been out of it in that game, but as you all know, Karasu is still a specimen, and so holding them both and then shooting is rather impressive from Kaiser. But actually, that's not the only interesting physical stat regarding Kaiser, because much like the mistake I made with his raw power and strength, I've always thought that Kaiser is not that great in the air. And I mean, it kinda seems the case. Kaiser is not a high flyer, nor does his playing style requires it. However, the level of acrobatic movements he is able to pull off in the air is again rather impressive. And please don't get me wrong here, he is no Shido, Gagamaru or Nagi in this regard specifically. But again, him contesting Rin after the latter flipped him is all the argument you would need for saying that Kaiser is rather decent in the air. Not only that, but as you all remember in the Ubers game, when he was tackled and flipped by Aryu, Kaiser found no issue in spinning and then shooting the ball, inevitably scoring one of the best goals in the series. However, enough about his surprising physical stats. Let's actually talk about what we know that Kaiser is great at, and that's of course his speed. Because you see, Kaiser is a speed demon. He is not on the highest of tiers, he is no Chigiri, Zantetsu or Kuruna, but he is right after them. I think he sits firmly on Otoya, maybe Shido's level. He is even faster than the likes of Yuki, which as you all know, he is a speed demon in his own right. Yet Kaiser is definitely faster. I mean, just look at the way he is circulating Kuruna here. That's actually demonic speed, especially when he is fusing that speed with one of his signature abilities and weapons, but more on that later. For now, however, let's actually talk about the last physical stat, which is his endurance. Which, as you all know, I think Kaiser has an off-the-charts endurance. Not only does Metavision requires an insane amount of stamina, Kaiser's playing style specifically requires an elevated level of endurance. As I said, not only is he able to play play a full game with metavision, but he also is always going back and forth between defense and offense without even breaking a sweat. And that of course means that his endurance is off the charts. However, with this final stat, we actually reach the interesting stuff. We actually reach Kaiser's abilities and weapons. Now, it is no secret here. Kaiser's whole playing style revolves around his broken shooting ability. In fact, the reason I said that he packs only few weapons is because the shooting ability is that good. And because it is that good, Kaiser actually dedicated his big brain and his whole playing style for that shooting ability. Every weapon Kaiser has helps him get in range so he can use his broken shooting ability. However, I want to keep his shooting ability last, and first I want to talk about the small weapons here and there, starting up straight with his perfect hand placement. Now, I know that technically Karasu and Rin introduced this ability back in the third selection, where the player utilizes his hand in order to do two things. First, gauge the distance between him and his opponents, and secondly, to keep said opponent at bay. However, even though Karasu and Rin introduced it, the king of this ability specifically is without a doubt Michael Kaiser. He was the first to actually utilize his hands in a very dominant way. I mean, look at the way he handled Bachira like he is a toddler. The guy pulled off a perfect ambush and he is trying to stop Kaiser from shooting. However, by simply perfectly placing his hand on Bachira, he completely destroyed his momentum. And of course, Kaiser was able to shoot and then score. And in all honesty, this is such a broken ability because it kinda closes the gap to the strongest of players. I mean, sure, you might not win in a straight shoulder-to-shoulder interaction, but as we've seen from Isigi, by simply holding the other player with your hand, you are able to give yourself few precious seconds of air where you can actually do as you please. And once we get to Kaiser's shooting ability, you'll understand why is this weapon is so deadly at Kaiser's hands. However, as you all know, this is not the only weapon that Kaiser uses in order to position himself to shoot, because as you all know, Kaiser also presents metavision. Not only that, but his metavision is of the highest of calibers, probably second only to Snuffy and on Charles and Isigi's level. And in fact, Kaiser is the first player to introduce metavision officially. I mean, sure, Isigi did it back in the first selection, but it was Kaiser who confirmed the existence of metavision. However, what does this metavision enables him to do and how it helps him to get in range? Well, as you all know, metavision is the player's ability to take in all the information that are in his peripheral vision. Which means not only it is near impossible to sneak up on a player with metavision, unless of course the opponent also presents metavision, but also it helps Kaiser in perfectly navigating the field. Not only does Kaiser know where he should go, but he also knows in advance how the field is going to shape so he can deduct the best route to reach that destination. And as I said, in this regard specifically, I feel like he is only rivaled by the likes of Isigi, Charles, and maybe Karasu. Of course, here I am excluding the geniuses because they have their own counterparts in metavision. In any case, however, I feel like with metavision, it is the perfect weapon for me to introduce the premise behind Kaiser's persona. You see, at first, in the first 3 games of the NEL, Kaiser was not pulling off his S game. He was very satisfied with the level he achieved, and so his performance declined from the days he actually made it to be a new Gen 11. And this actually showed in his playing style as a whole and in his metavision specifically. Even though the guy had the same vision as Isigi, he still was lacking in terms of analyzing and predicting the field better. However, all of this changed in the PXG game, where Kaiser actually regained his old playing style. The playing style that actually made him the new Gen 11, which means Kaiser simply reverted to his ultimate level. However, this new improved level and this new improved playing style made Kaiser into one of the most menacing metavision users in the show, period. I mean, just look at how crazy he is in tracing the ball. The guy is quite literally everywhere here. But even though this is busted and metavision is obviously one of the strongest weapons in the show, that's not the only overpowered vision Kaiser presents. Because you see, he was also the first player to introduce the Predator eyes. Sure, he does not use them like Baro and he is not hunting the goalkeeper. I mean, in fact, I think that's only unique to him. Every other player utilizes the second type of the Predator eyes, which which is the goal course hunting ability. You see, in a general sense, the Predator Eyes are a weapon that is meant to translate the player's shots into goals, and as I said, this is done in two ways. The first, which Kaiser doesn't present, we are not going to talk about that completely. The second, however, is what Kaiser has been using, and in fact, it's what Kaiser has introduced. You see, when in range and before he takes his shot, Kaiser actually glances at the goal, and in that split second, he is able to deduct what is the safest, most optimal route to reach the goal. And from there, after that split second, Kaiser is able to swiftly kill the enemy team without them even realizing what happened. Again, this is not only due to the Predator Eyes, but also Kaiser's broken shooting ability. However, before we get to his shooting, I feel like we need to talk about another weapon that works in tandem with Kaiser's ocular ability. Of course, I'm talking about his footwork. You see, in the first 3 games of the NEL, Kaiser presented one of the best footwork in the show. I mean, he definitely seemed to be second to ECG and Ren, especially in the Ubers and PXG game at first. However, when Kaiser reverted to his original self, when Kaiser threw satisfaction off the window, he was actually able to improve his off-the-ball movements to a level that no one thought is possible for Kaiser. And of course, his footwork is obviously broken due to metavision and the amount of information he sees, but also because of his insane speed. Kaiser's off-the-ball movements are one of the deadliest in the show. I mean, again, in the PXG game, the way he was circling Kiora was honestly diabolical. And mind you, not even Karasu was able to keep up with him in that moment. Only Rin and Charles was able to do it. And I mean, granted, Karasu still did not awaken metavision at that time, but even still, it is Karasu at the end of the day, and beating him off the ball is still as hard as ever. And so, this is a testament to how broken Kaiser's off-the-ball movements are. And in fact, I want to add a sub-weapon that should be added to Kaiser's off-the-ball movements. You see, because Kaiser is restriction type, he is a player that excels in hard situations, and so this caused Kaiser to have one of the best unpredictability stats in the show, maybe second only to Renan Barrow. However, when this is coupled with his insane footwork and his ability to turn the 0 to a 1, you get a very devastating, very smart character and a player. And honestly, the thing I like the most about Kaiser is just how dedicated his weapons are. Not a singular weapon seems to be random. Every other weapon Kaiser has is meant to elevate his shooting ability, which I think it's time that we spoke of that specifically. You see, Kaiser has the fastest winning shot in the entirety of Blue Lock. Not just the U20 category, but actually the entirety of football in Blue Lock. As you all know, not even Noah or Prince contend Kaiser in this area specifically. However, for Kaiser this means that most goalkeepers or defenders cannot even tell when Kaiser actually shot, making predicting him and then stopping his shot one of the hardest feats anyone could pull off. I mean, in his first showing, everyone was surprised that the ball hit the net. That's because no one actually saw when Kaiser shot, and so for any goalkeeper, stopping a shot like this is almost impossible. However, even though this is one of the most broken shooting abilities in the show without a doubt, I feel like it wasn't always without its limitations. I mean, look at it this way. What's better? A curvy shot with a much harder to read trajectory, or a direct straight to the point shot? I mean, even if his swinging speed is the best in the entirety of the show, I feel like it being very direct and moving in a straight line is actually a weakness that many other players took advantage of that specifically. However, Kaiser being the smart freak that he is, he could not let this slide, and so he came up with a technique that exponentially added to the threat level of his shooting ability. I mean, as if it wasn't enough that he was the best at something in that regard, Kaiser needed to be that broken. However, what is this technique I keep on talking about? Well, of course, I am referring to the Magnus technique. You see, by shooting the ball in a specific angle, Kaiser is able to bamboozle the goalkeeper and the defenders by shooting a shot that completely changes its trajectory. I mean, in all honesty, this kinda made the Kaiser impact completely broken. Not only it is very hard to pinpoint the moment Kaiser shoots, now the goalkeeper and the defenders have no way of telling where Kaiser actually shot the ball. Their only hope is to actually get close so they can stop either shot. However, despite this, I gotta say that the Magnus technique is not without its drawbacks. You see, even though the Kaiser Impact Magnus is near impossible to predict, The fact of the matter remains, it has a very strong condition. I mean, the fact that the ball needs to be completely stationary for Kaiser to pull it off is rather bad, especially given the high level of intensity we are witnessing in Blue Lock's matchups. However, I feel like with creative midfielders like Sai or even Kiora, Kaiser would be able to pull off one of the strongest weapons ever, despite it actually presenting a lot of conditions. However, even beyond those conditions, I feel like the Kaiser Impact generally speaking and the Kaiser Impact Magnus specifically are some of the most broken not only shooting abilities but also weapons in general. But above all, this shooting ability is at the core of Kaiser's playing style, and it is the reason why he plays the way he does. However, can this German Emperor actually beat the Japanese and the Italian Dons? Don Lorenzo, one of the most dominant yet coolest characters in Blue Lock, which is really interesting because this is a show that really rewards aggressiveness. Blue Lock really rewards being egotistical and being about that edgy life. However, against all of that stand Lorenzo and Charles, two of the coolest, most easygoing characters, yet are two of the most dominant players in the show. And in the case of Lorenzo, he is the best defender we've seen, and by a huge margin. I mean, even if you compare him to the second defender, which would be Aiku, he is far ahead from the latter. In my matchup between the two, a lot of you guys said that this is not even a matchup because Lorenzo completely blows Aiku. And so, how is that even possible? How is a character with no ego to speak of, with no aggressiveness, and with a very cool mentality the most dominant defender we've seen? Well, it's pretty simple. Lorenzo could be only described by being phenomenal. He breaks every rule there is to break about football in the realm of Blue Lock. He has one of the saddest backstories, yet he has a very playful personality, completely against everything we know about Blue Lock. He has no ego, yet he is one of the most dominant new gens. And it's not just about mentality or his personality. Like, even when we get to physicality, he breaks the mold completely. He is very skinny, yet he is one of the most dominant duelists in the show. I mean, how do you even get that? In fact, we will be starting with this point specifically, because it's time for us to talk about the Don's physical stats. And as I said, let's start with his strength and raw power. Now, Lorenzo is a very skinny dude, which means you wouldn't expect him to be that strong. However, how is it possible a skinny dude like this is able to pocket Kaiser for a whole game? I mean, as I just said, in Kaiser's part, Kaiser is one of the most aggressive and one of the strongest players we've seen. It honestly doesn't make any sense. I've always thought he should have an average physicality, but that feat is crazy. And I understand it's not just strength alone, because when we get to his abilities and weapons, you will see that he has a lot of weapons that help him in dueling. However, one cannot deny that whenever it was a duel between him and any other player and it got physical, no one ever beat him. Sure, he did not go against the likes of Baro or Kunigami, but even someone as strong as Aiku. We've seen him battle Kaiser for the ball and they are evenly matched. However, with Lorenzo, it was a one-sided massacre. I mean, again, he has a lot of techniques that help him with this, but one cannot deny the level of strength required to do such feats. I mean, the guy literally looks like he comes from a village under famine. Just look at him. Yet he is pretty strong for that muscle mass. But enough about his strength. Let's move to his speed, which I would say he is pretty good. I wouldn't say he is insane by any means, but at the same time he is not low. However, one physical aspect that I think Lorenzo might have the best in the U20 category is his endurance. Not only is Lorenzo capable of going up and down the field repeatedly. I mean, he is not only the best defender, he is also one of the best midfielders. In fact, in terms of playmaking, I rank him as the 5th player in Blue Lock, right below Sai, Charles, Ness and Hiyori. And what this means is that not only is Lorenzo always on defense, he is also always building the attack. Because as we've seen in the Ubers game, Isigi deducted that every attack either starts with Nico or Lorenzo, meaning the guy is always the heart of the team, whether be it when Ubers are playing defensively or offensively. However, this alone would not give him the best endurance, because we've seen players like Kaiser, Isigi, Rin and Chido pull off the same play. They are always on offense and at the same time they are always defending. However, what takes Lorenzo over the edge in terms of stamina is actually his man-marking capabilities, as we've seen in the PXG game from Kunigami. Man-marking insanely fast players like Shido or Kaiser requires an insane amount of endurance. I mean, even a powerhouse like Kunigami ran out of gas keeping up with Shido only after 20 minutes. Yet Lorenzo was doing it with an arguably more threatening striker in Michael Kaiser. The guy held him for a whole game without even breaking a sweat. And I understand him not breaking a sweat is a way from the writer to show us that he is not giving us his best, but it is still a good indicator to how insane his endurance is. However, and while Lorenzo is insane and arguably the best in this physical aspect, he is probably one of the worst in the next, which is his jumping ability. Lorenzo literally never won a duel in the air. We've never actually seen him even jump once to the ball. It's always either Aiku or Aryu. In fact, I think Snuffy knew exactly what he was doing when he put the best two high flyers next to Lorenzo, so they can cover him in the air every time. However, for the Italian Don, this means that he has one of the worst aerial mobilities in the show. He is quite literally useless in the air. And I mean, if you are that dominant on the ground, being dominant in the air as well would be akin to a cheat code. And so I think this is a good balancing feat against Lorenzo. But moving on to the final physical stat, and I know usually I only cover these four. However, with special players like Shido, Nagi, Gagamaru, and Lorenzo, we need to talk about their special agility. You see, one of the deadliest things about Lorenzo is his ability to jump towards the ball all of a sudden. The way the Don lunges himself towards the ball or his opponents is so outwardly that this weapon single-handedly allowed him to compete and even beat Metavision users on numerous times. And I mean, of course, this would not even be possible without an insane agility. That I would say that Lorenzo in this aspect is third to only Gagamaru and Nagi, even beating the likes of Shida, which is actually insane. However, and since I spoke of his lunges, I feel like it is the perfect timing for us to move to his abilities and weapons. Because it's not just that his agility is broken, I feel like the way he utilizes it in his lunges kinda takes it from a physical trait to an actual weapon. And so let's start with it immediately. As I said, Lorenzo's lunges are so insane. They even allowed him to perform nearly impossible feats, like stopping the Kaiser impact and beating Kaiser's Predator Eyes. Which is actually funny because Gagamaru was the second player to stop the Predator Eyes. It seems that agility is the direct counter to the Predator Eyes. If the Predator Eyes are all about hunting the best course, then jumping unexpectedly into that course after the player has shot is the surest way to beat the Predator Eyes. Unless of course you are Charles and your Metavision is crazy like that. However, and speaking of Metavision, you see, not only did Lorenzo beat the Predator Eyes, he also beat Metavision on numerous times, thanks of course to his agility, but also thanks to another weapon which I will cover in a second. You see, Lorenzo's lunges made him such a wild card on the field that he was able to close the gap on numerous Metavision users without them actually knowing it. And in fact, this became so deadly that Isigi and Hiyori started to account for Lorenzo specifically ditching Kaiser and showing up at the last moment. Which not only was it an impressive feat for both players, it also introduced Lorenzo's only weakness, which of course we will cover at the end of his assessment. For now, let's talk about the second weapon that enables Lorenzo to be a wild card on the field. Sure, his lunges are insane and his agility is very impressive, as he has the highest chance of snatching the ball among any defensive player. However, this would not be as impressive if Lorenzo did not know how to target the most critical spots. I mean, if you don't understand where you should stand on the pitch, then your lunges are simply useless. I mean, how would you lunge to Isigi if he is half a field away? And this is where Lorenzo's insane perception comes to play. You see, as I stated earlier, Lorenzo's impossible feat of neutralizing Kaiser is not only thanks to his weird body and his strength. It is also thanks to his agility, but more importantly, it is thanks to his insane perception. Because not only was Lorenzo capable of keeping up with Kaiser's Metavision, he also seemed to be a step ahead of him every time. Not only that, he also was a step ahead of Isigi's Metavision in the Uber's game numerous times. I mean, in that game, we've seen him both and Isigi change perception blows. And what this means for us, it puts his genius perception on the level of Isigi and Kaiser's Metavision in the Uber's game. However, you have to understand, he never truly targeted Isigi as his first option. He always was on Kaiser, and he beats the latter when it comes to perception every time. The only reason Isigi was able to take Lorenzo by surprise on numerous times is because the latter was on Kaiser and then switched in the last moment, where Isigi was able to take advantage of that. I mean, Isigi himself, who I would say had the most W's over Lorenzo, considers him as the second most dominant player individually. And of course, this extends to one of Lorenzo's signature weapons. I mean, his perception was insane to the point Isigi thought that he must have metavision. However, because he is a genius, it means that he doesn't have metavision, but his perception is on that level. Now, you could say that his perception is on Isigi and Kaiser's metavision in the Uber's game, and we all know they improved them in the PXG game, and I honestly would not have any issue with that. I mean, his perception was definitely better than Kaiser's in the Uber's game, but I would not have an issue with Kaiser's metavision being better at the end of the PXG game than Lorenzo's perception. Now, one final thing I want to say about his perception. I mean, a lot of people clown on him due to what Hiyori did, but we've seen him do the same to Kaiser and Isigi on numerous times when he was on offense. And it's not the case where he was on another player and jumped on the occasion at the last moment. When he did it to Isigi and Kaiser, they were targeting him specifically. However, and speaking of Lorenzo going on the offense, let's talk about why I consider him one of the best playmakers in the show. Well, of course, his perception plays a huge role. His ability to better position himself on the field so he can give his teammates the best options, of course, goes a long way. However, that's not the only answer. You see, not only is Lorenzo insane at this, he also has one of the best dribbling abilities in the show. I mean, at 93, he is on the level of Chigiri and second only to Bachira in the NEL. However, I gotta say this, while technically he is on the same level as Chigiri, we've seen Lorenzo's dribbling being far better than Chigiri's, especially in the later games where the writer completely forgot about the Red Panther. But going back to Lorenzo, why is his dribbling ability that special? Well, you see, Lorenzo's very special physicality enables him to perform the weirdest of dribbling moves, which is actually at the core of his dribbling ability. While other players might employ techniques in order to surpass their opponents, Lorenzo's whole dribbling ability is about his wobbly body and how he uses it to make himself impossible to read. This wobbliness of his is akin to the Jenga technique that is utilized by Levi and to a certain extent by Bachira. Because you see, when Lorenzo is dribbling, he completely throws his center of gravity left and right, meaning that his upper body is completely detached from his footwork. And if you know anything about football, you would understand that it is the upper body that typically gives off where the dribbler is going with his dribbling. Meaning for someone like Lorenzo or anyone who is using the Jenga, where his upper body is completely detached from the footwork, it usually makes it impossible for anyone to read the direction of his dribbles, and his opponents usually find it very hard to figure out what just happened. And when you couple this with his insane perception and his ability to perfectly position himself on the pitch, it enables Lorenzo to not only lead the attack of his team but also direct the pacing of the game, making him not only the beating heart of the defensive line but also the beating heart of the front line. And I'm not sure I could say the same thing about any other player in the U20 category. I've never seen a player being the beating heart of both offense and defense. I mean, the only one I could see him that close to Lorenzo in this aspect is none other than Rin Itoshi. And it kinda makes sense because both are the most dominant individuals in the U20 category right after Loki. However, and believe it or not, this is not all to the Italian Don, because even though I said he excels as a defender in a general sense due to his agility, perception, and his elevated strength, Lorenzo's biggest selling point in terms of defense is his ability to straight up lock down almost any striker he sets his sights on, and this is possible due to his insane dueling ability. Now, of course, his insane dribbling gives him an amazing dueling ability on offense. However, when it comes to defense, Lorenzo is without a doubt the best duelist in the U20 category. And in fact, with the exception of Aiko, not a singular player comes close in this aspect specifically. I mean, again, him being able to completely lock down Michael Kaiser for the entirety of the game, to the point the latter was not able to do anything unless Lorenzo attended to other players like Yuki, Hiyori, and Isigi. And if you think about it, this is a death sentence to teams with just one striker. I mean, if Lorenzo can straight up eliminate a striker from the pitch, then teams that rely on just one striker or simply one ace simply crumbles in the presence of Lorenzo. However, that's not all there is to his dueling ability. I mean, he remains the only player in the U20 category that we've seen not even getting challenged one-on-one on defense. Even insane dribblers like Ness and Hiyori, whom had no issue dribbling past even the likes of Ren, immediately forward the ball when they are face-to-face with Lorenzo. However, how is that even possible? Why is his dueling ability this broken? Well, I feel like it is due to two reasons. First is his wobbly body again. No one can really understand how to deal with that body, and I feel like with that agility, it's very risky to try and pull off any dribbling move, because Lorenzo's foot could simply go to the ball just like that, and the player on the offense would not expect something like that. But secondly, I feel like it is due to a speculative ocular ability that I think Lorenzo presents, which is an elevated form from Caraso's assassin eyes. You see, this has never been confirmed, but when you look on how Caraso and Lorenzo play, you would understand that they both have an insane ocular ability that enables them to target the weak points of their opponents. And again, it was not confirmed by any means, but this would explain how Lorenzo is able to target Kaiser and Isagi's blind spots, how he was able to completely neutralize Kaiser, and why every player chooses to pass the ball when they are face to face with Lorenzo. Again, I could be reading into it too much, and it is simply due to his agility and his ability to jump into the ball unexpectedly. That could be the reason why players choose not to dribble past him, because the risk is very high. However, and despite this ability to launch towards the ball unexpectedly being a very oppressive weapon, it's not all sunshines and roses. And that's due to the fact that because Lorenzo is not that serious about football, I feel like this weapon against very smart players kinda becomes a double-edged sword. Now don't get me wrong, Lorenzo still is the king of one-on-ones. However, football games are not only one-on-ones. You need to be able to perform well when you are in the presence of multiple good players. And in this aspect specifically, I feel like Lorenzo's weakness bears its teeth. You see, and not to sound like a broken record, due to his impulsiveness and his less serious nature, his dashes and lunges could be exploited by the smartest of players. And we've seen this happen to him twice in the Ubers game. Sure, those were the only two times where Lorenzo straight up lost against any player, but it is a weakness that was exploited by Hiyori and Isagi not just once, but actually twice, which in my eyes means that if Lorenzo does not take things seriously, and he keeps on being this impulsive, I feel like smart players would start to utilize this against him. Sure, neither Isagi or Hiyori would win against him one-on-one, and sure you could say that he was on Kaiser and jumped at the last moment to both players, but I feel like he could have done something better. For example, with Isagi, he could have launched to a position that is in front of him instead of lunging towards the ball specifically. And I feel like with his insane dueling ability, if he is able to do that, it is GG's for any striker or a midfielder. However, the fact remains that his impulsiveness is really hurting him. I feel like him being the most dominant player one-on-one and being very strong overall is impressive, but I would really want to see him being more serious and have a better mentality than what he has right now. And as you all know from my previous videos, to me, mentality matters a lot. And I feel like Lorenzo is a perfect example of that. And in my books, that's a very deadly weakness that actually would matter a lot in today's video. However, regardless of this weakness, Lorenzo remains the most dominant defender in Blue Lock and one of the best playmakers in the show. Not only that, he is one of the most dominant players individually, being only second to Loki and rivaled only by Ren. However, can the phenomenal force beat the ultimate striker and the ultimate midfielder? Sai Itoshi, the Itachi of Blue Lock and the prodigy of Japan. A very professional, very cool-headed character with what's probably the best mentality in the show if we exclude the pros. But don't let that cool-headedness and that professionalism fool you. Sai is as egotistical as they come. He is a player that only lives for his own craft, and he lives only to become the best midfielder in the world. But beyond just his mentality, Sai is a very well-rounded player with an amazing physicality and a broken set of skills to go along with it. And he actually had this ever since he was young, to the point he was scouted by Real, the best club in the world of Blue Lock, at a very young age, which I gotta say in of itself is honestly an insane feat. But as you all know, this transfer to Spain played a huge role in Sai's ego maturity, because going into Real thinking that he wanna be the best striker in the world, and then meeting Bunny made him realize that his set of skills and his abilities are more suited to be a midfielder, and thus began his journey on the true path of being the best. However, and as you all know, we gotta start with his physical stats, which I gotta say, Sai has a great well-rounded physicality. And I mean this is derived from the fact that narratively speaking, he was portrayed as being evenly matched to his brother Rin. And I mean they have the same genetics and so they should be close to each other. I think Rin is a little bit better physically speaking, but Sai is not that far off. And this is why in the U20 game we've seen them being evenly matched when it comes to physicality. And the only difference between the Itoshi brothers was in terms of technicality. However, for Sai, this well-rounded physicality means that he has great power, great strength, great jumping ability, amazing speed, and an astonishing endurance. And while we don't have any confirmation for his endurance, the fact that he has metavision dictates that he has insane endurance. However, for the other physical aspects, we've seen him being great at all of them. And while of course this well-roundedness means that he doesn't straight up dominate any physical area, he does not lack in any of them. But, and this is why I love talking about the Itoshi brothers that much, their physicality is straight to the point. They are not the most dominant, they are well-rounded, which means every aspect is great with them, and so it's easy to talk about their physicality. However, with that, now it's time for us to get to the more interesting stuff. Ladies and gents, it's time for us to talk about his abilities and weapons. Now, I've always said in my videos that Sai represents the perfect midfielder, not only because of his well-rounded physicality that enables him to be an insane anchor for any team, but also due to his insane weapons that all serves the purpose of making Sai the best playmaker we've seen as of right now, which I understand Hugo is shaping up to be the only threat to Kaiser in this regard, but we still don't know much about Hugo as he only played for 2 chapters as of making this video. Once we get enough from Hugo, a matchup against Sai would be legendary. In any case, however, let's actually start talking about Sai's abilities and weapons. Now, because I've alluded to it at first, and because both Kaiser and Lorenzo excel in this field specifically, let's talk about Sai's perception and metavision. Now, when the U20 game first came out, we did not know if he had metavision. In fact, because it was introduced much later with Kaiser, we did not even know if metavision existed. And so we only watched him being very dominant against the Blue Lockers at that stage. However, once Isigi acquired metavision from Kaiser, he understood that the plays that Sai was doing in the U20 game that Isigi did not even understand are all thanks to metavision. And now when we go and reread the U20 chapters, it is obvious that Sai definitely has metavision. I mean, his ability to position himself always perfectly on offense is a testament to that. Not only this, but the fact that Sai is always a step ahead from any other player is also a testament to metavision. His playing style of actually positioning himself where the ball is most likely to fall is akin to what Isigi and Kaiser have been doing in the Neo Egoist League. I mean, in one instance, after delivering a pass to Sendo, he expected that he would not score, and he went and positioned himself on the opposite side of Sendo so he can catch the ball once Gagamaru stopped it. However, this is not the only reason why I think Sai definitely has metavision. I mean, sure, Isigi said it so we know he has, but feats-wise, him keeping up with Shido is akin to metavision, because in order to keep up with an insane perception from a genius, a talented learner is required to have metavision. That's the reason why Kaiser and Isigi could keep up with Rin and Lorenzo, that's the reason why Snuffy could keep up with Noah, and that's the reason why Prince, who is a talented learner, could not keep up with Noah's perception. And as I said with Shido, Sai was keeping up with him very easily. In fact, him keeping up with Shido the way he was keeping up with him alludes to the level of Sai's metavision. Because simply saying that Sai has metavision isn't really helpful in today's matchup, specifically because both Lorenzo and Kaiser are insane in this regard. And the reason for that is because, as you all know, metavision has its levels. For example, Karasu's metavision is far ahead of Ryo's, or Isigi is far ahead of Hiyori's. And so for that reason, we need to pinpoint where Sai stands in terms of metavision. Well, it's pretty simple actually. Because he was keeping up with Shido, I am putting Sai's metavision on the level of Isigi and Kaiser at the end of the PXG game, simply because Shido was keeping up with them at that level. And we know Shido did not improve his perception, and so Sai keeping up with Shido in the U20 game is actually the same as Isigi and Kaiser keeping up with Shido in the PXG game. And another argument is that the only one who kept up with Shido and Sai in that game is actually Berserker Rin, who's the second player to keep up with Kaiser and Isigi at the end of the PXG game. And so I am fairly confident that Sai's metavision is of the highest of calibers. And I would say that the only way that Isigi could beat him in terms of perception would be with the fastest piece, which is actually the second weapon I wanna talk about regarding to Sai. I know it's only speculation, but hear me out. You see, the fastest piece in essence is just an elevated sense of the protagonist's feeling, where Isagi not only is he understanding how Ness, for example, is thinking, but he forces himself to think of that ahead of time. He forces himself to understand Ness before the latter even makes his play. And Isagi was only able to reach that level when he completely rid himself of any emotion, when he completely stopped idealizing Noah, when he got rid of his rivalry with Rin and Kaiser. And this level of maturity I feel like reminds me of course of Noah, but also it reminds me of Loki and Sai. Neither player cares about anything except their craft and how they play better on the pitch. Neither consider any type of emotion on the field. As for Sai, I feel like his ability to position himself goes beyond just perception, because he was positioning himself in positions where he actually knew what would happen. When Rin stopped Sendo at the end of the first half in the U20 game, Sai went into that position specifically trusting that Rin would stop Sendo. And again, this goes beyond just metavision because he kinda is expecting what's about to happen. However, if this was the only argument, I would not actually speak of it, because I actually have a second argument, which I can't really talk about without actually getting into another weapon. You see, in Shido's Big Bang Drive, Sai actually trusted that Shido will be the only one reacting to his pass, kinda like how Isagi trusted that Ness would deliver a pass that no one else would react to. And so because of this similarity, I would say that Sai definitely has the fastest piece. Now again, it is a speculation, but as you all know, in these matchups I take the full potential of the player. And sure, you could say that the full potential of Lorenzo is him getting serious, but there is no confirmation of that. Instead, we kinda have the confirmation for Sai. But in any case, let's actually carry on with his weapons. And next, since I brought Ness, let's actually talk about another speculative weapon that I think Sai has. Now actually, before we get to that speculative weapon, let's talk about the weapon that actually leads to that, which is the reflex meeting reflex. You see, through having either metavision or insane perception, two players could target the same position on the pitch without actually connecting with each other, meaning not only do they not give anything to the defenders, they also waste no time in snatching the perfect position. That's how Isagi and Hiyori were able to beat Baro and Aiko, and that's how Shido and Charles were able to beat Kaiser and Isagi. However, Hiyori and Isagi were not the first to introduce this weapon, because we've seen it from Shido and Sai. In the feat that I spoke of just now, when Sai targeted a position that only Shido could react to, they actually used the reflex meets reflex weapon. They both hunted for the most optimal spot, and they both went to it before the defense knew what hit them. However, and I know it seems a little bit different, but that's all due to Shido. Shido's perception is different from metavision. Shido does not predict, he is the best at reaction, and so the moment he saw Sai target the space behind Ryo, the latter immediately started sprinting. And so of course this means that Sai has the reflex meets reflex weapon. However, this is confirmed. What I am speculating that Sai also has is actually what Ness pulled off at the end of the PXG game. You see, Ness, not only was he aiming to meet Kaiser in the most optimal spot without any connection, Ness wanted to deliver a pass that actually pushed both him and Kaiser to reach new heights. And of course, because Kaiser got emotional with Ness, he actually failed at predicting that. But Isagi, who is completely emotionless, was able to capitalize. But it's not about Kaiser and Ness here, it's about Sai, and did he actually do this? Well, you see, his pass to Shido in the Big Bang Drive actually targeted a future Shido. A Shido that Sai did not actually see yet. A Shido that would actually rise to the challenge and evolve. However, if that was only the case, I would say that this is reflex meeting reflex weapon and not really what Ness did. But when we get to the other U20 strikers, we've seen Sai specifically deliver passes that would push them to reach new heights. He did it with the Mannequin and Fox guys, but specifically he did it with Sendo a lot. He did it when Rin stopped him at the end of the first half, and he actually did it twice before that. However, I gotta give a disclaimer. You see, there is this friend of the channel, and he is an amazing YouTuber that does a lot of matchups as well, and he actually gave me a different perspective on this. You see, what Ness did and Sai did sure are similar, but they are fundamentally different. Same, but different. You see, because Ness was actually pushing both himself and Kaiser to reach new height, while Sai was simply pushing Shido, Sendo and the rest of the strikers to his level. Not so they can all evolve, but he was trying to push them to his own level, which means it is in fact a less impressive feat than what Ness did. Ness was literally trying to get into new heights, while Sai was simply pushing the strikers to his own level. And in all honesty, I love this counter argument, and it is exactly why I love debating with you guys. Now I know, up until this point I've been only talking about Psy's speculative abilities. I feel like I've been only exploring how strong is full potential Psy. But I gotta say that I think there is just one more speculative ability that Psy has that we need to explore as well. However, it is a little bit special because I can't really explore it without getting into Psy's real abilities and weapons. And so let's dive straight into that. Now, because Psy is the ultimate camp, I feel like the first real weapon we gotta talk about is his passing ability. It's his ability as a camp to deliver the ball to the front line. And in this area specifically, Psy is quite literally one of the best, rivaled only by Charles and maybe Hugo. I'm still not sure about Hugo because we still need to see a lot from him before we jump into any conclusions. And so for now, Charles is the only player that comes close to Psy's broken passing ability. However, what makes this passing ability so deadly? Well, first, let's talk about versatility. In the U20 game, in the span of just one game, we've seen Psy deliver a plethora of different passes in different situations, from short to long, fast to slow, lobbing to powerful, and even insanely arcing passes. Psy quite frankly shown us that he can deliver any type of pass, and I gotta bring Charles again into this because he is the only player that's shown us more versatility in his passes. Even insane other cams like Hiyori or Nas were not shown to have this level of versatility. However, it's not just about the type of pass. Even when it comes to the type of trajectory, Psy has an insane control over that as well. From extremely arcing passes that either go inward or outward, to backspin passes or pinpoint accurate deliveries, Psy quite literally can modify his trajectory however he likes and however the situation calls for it. And I feel like this is a point that usually get ignored when talking about passes. We all like to talk about versatility in terms of what passes you deliver. However, even within the same type of passes, the trajectory could differ a lot. I mean, one example I like to give, even though Ryu knows of his arcing passes. At one point, Ryu even thought that he was shooting due to the extreme arc the ball took in order to reach Shido. And that's honestly just one example. In another case, he delivered a lob-in pass to Sendo with a backspin rotation that if he was against any other defender without insane perception, it would have completely bamboozled them. However, Nico actually rose to the challenge and was able to stop Sendo completely. But this level of control over his passes and their trajectories is not all there is to Psy's passing ability. You see, another area where Psy completely dominates is actually the accuracy of his own passes. And I feel like here again, he is only rivaled by Charles and somewhat Hiyori. I feel like because Hiyori always aims for the most optimal spot and not necessarily the strikers themselves, his accuracy is a little bit questionable compared to someone like Charles or Psy who can deliver extremely accurate passes to any striker on the pitch. However, here's the scary part. This level of accuracy to Psy's passing is rather comparable to the Predator Eyes. Psy is able to deliver pinpoint passes to any striker he aims for. One example I always like to give is his free kick pass to Shido that resulted in the second goal of the U20 team. You see, in that sequence, not only was Psy delivering an amazing pass to Shido, he also accounted for Chigury's speed and delivered a pinpoint pass that was only 2 centimeters away from Chigury and at the same time was perfect for Shido's vision. And honestly, this is just scary. This level of accuracy should not be legal. However, again, I feel like Charles is the only one who could rival him here. Maybe Hugo once more, but it is still a little bit too early to judge. However, me comparing him to Charles in this point specifically is actually very deliberate. Because you see, when Kaiser and Ness blocked 99% of Charles' options, he still managed to find a way thanks to an ocular ability that he presents. And in fact, me comparing this level of accuracy to the Predator Eyes is actually again deliberate for me to explore this type of eyes. You see, Charles presents what I like to dub the Sniper Eyes. They are the Predator Eyes but for midfielders. They help the midfielder pinpoint with extreme accuracy the perfect pass trajectory that he needs to follow in order to reach the striker, or sometimes to reach the empty space beyond the defenders. And much like the Predator Eyes, the player cannot present this ocular ability without two conditions being met. First is the extreme accuracy of the passes, and secondly an absurd level of control over the pass delivery from the midfielder. And as you can tell, Psy not only presents this level of craziness, he is also arguably the best at both aspects. Maybe not the pass delivery because he is second to Charles, but when it comes to accuracy, he is the best. And so I am speculating that Psy also has this ocular ability. However, and if you could believe it, that's not all to Sai's passing. You see, in total opposition to Hiyori, Sai delivers passes that are tailored to the striker he is forwarding the ball to. Sai doesn't just deliver the ball to a perfect position for the striker, but on top of that, he takes the striker's specs, abilities, weapons, and even weaknesses into account. And thus, Sai's passes often feel so right for the situation and the playing style of the striker. And I know we've seen this weapon from other players, especially Ryo with Nagi and Ness with Kaiser. However, the brilliance of Sai shows in the fact that he was doing it with any striker he plays with, even if the striker is complete shit or that's the first time Sai is playing with him, because we've seen him do it with the shitty strikers of the U20 team and with Shido as soon as he joined the game. And maybe he trained with Shido prior, but I really doubted that he trained with any of the U20 strikers, especially because Sai was looking down on them so bad. However, this is not the only reason why this weapon is very strong at the hands of Sai, because you see, with his insane accuracy and his level of control over his passing, Sai quite literally delivers what we call perfection incarnate in a pass. Not only it is perfect for the striker's playing style, not only it is delivered to the most perfect position, but as I said before, even the types of passes are meant to push the striker further, are meant to elevate the striker's scoring ability, and we've seen that to a great effect. Sai took someone as shitty as Sendo and sparked a fire inside of him. Sure, the latter was not able to score in that game, but that completely changed him, and we've seen the results of that in the NEL, where he was able to score in a very high level game. However, here's the thing, no matter how broken the passing ability is, no matter how accurate or tailored it is, if you can't deliver the pass in the first place, then the passing ability in of itself is useless no matter how broken it is. And I feel like this is where the midfielder's dueling ability shines very well. And here, I'm not talking about on-the-ball dueling ability, but also I'm talking off the ball. Now obviously when it comes to off the ball, Metavision is the perfect weapon for that, but we've already explored it. However, when it comes to confrontation on the ball, the player needs an insane dueling ability. And this could be simple dueling ability like we've seen from Hugo, or an insane dribbling ability like we've seen from Ness and Hiyori. And obviously because Sai is very well rounded, and because Ren is always trying to copy him before the Berserker state, Sai obviously has a great dueling ability like we've seen it in full display in the U20 game. But on top of that, Sai has one of the most broken dribbling abilities we've seen in the show. However, in total opposition to broken dribbling abilities like Levi, Lorenzo or Renz, Sai's dribbling ability is completely reactive. And I know we've seen it being so great only in the U20 game, and the Blue Lockers increased their dueling ability insanely in the NEL. The fact of the matter remains that Sai's dribbling ability was even contending Berserker Ren, which as you all know is one of the best duelists in the show. In fact, on defense I think he is second only to Lorenzo. However, another thing that makes his dribbling so deadly, you see, the fact that it is reactive is obviously insane, because it makes stopping Sai a tricky ordeal. However, it is even crazier with him due to his analytical brain. Due to his extremely high soccer IQ, Sai's dribbling ability becomes completely broken, because he can analyze his opponents and perfectly counter their playing style with his dribbling moves, making him without a doubt one of the best dribblers in the show. And again, this is very important for his playing style. Not only is Sai able to pinpoint the perfect position from where he can deliver the perfect pass, Sai also has the ability to get into that position. Sai has the ability to bypass defenders in order to deliver a perfect pass. And judging by how crazy his passing ability is, overall I'd say Sai is truly the perfect midfielder. However, there is still one point I feel like we need to talk about regarding Sai, which is his mentality. Because I feel like Sai's mentality is quite perfect. As I said at the beginning, Sai is very egotistical, but at the same time he is extremely professional. He does not care about anything else except his own craft, and he doesn't let his emotions run high, and thus he is always calm and cool-headed. Even in the heat of the battle, Sai's nerves are stone cold, and I feel like even if he wasn't the perfect midfielder before, with this mentality he truly embodies that title. He truly becomes the ultimate midfielder in the U20 category. But here's the most important question. Can the perfect midfielder beat the ultimate striker and the phenomenal defender? For how this matchup will go, I feel like there are three schools of thoughts. But before we actually get to them, we need to address the elephant in the room, which is a debate regarding Kaiser and Lorenzo. You see, in the Ubers game, we've seen Lorenzo completely decimate Kaiser. And so how is this even a matchup? How is Kaiser even on the consideration list? Well, as you all know, Kaiser awakened in the PXG game and he reverted to his original level that enabled him to become a new Gen 11 striker. And here's the kicker, the Kaiser after the awakening is leagues ahead of the Kaiser before the awakening. The Kaiser before the awakening was much weaker than Lorenzo, but post-awakening Kaiser is definitely about that life. And so the matchup flames on. And to start it, let's get to the schools of thought. The first is actually an individual matchup. Who is the best individually? The second is who is the best overall from what we know right now, meaning we do not include potential. And this means the third school of thought is obviously with potential unlocked. And so let's start immediately with an individual battle. And I gotta say here, Lorenzo decimates both. Lorenzo just shits on Kaiser and Sai individually speaking. Not only because he is a genius and they are talented learners, but the fact that Isigi regards him as the second right after Loki is just absurd and leagues ahead of Kaiser and Sai. Sure, Sai has an insane dribbling ability, but as I said, that dribbling ability only shined in the U20 game. As you all know, all the Blue Lockers increased their dueling ability insanely in the NEL. Isigi went from completely getting decimated by Karasu on a one-on-one interaction to actually hold on his own until he can deliver a pass. That's honestly just an entirely different Isigi when it comes to dueling. And so I am a bit iffy with Sai's dribbling ability. Sure, he did great against Berserker Rin, but at the end of the day he lost to him in that. Again, it's a genius versus a talented learner, but that's a perfect example of where Sai's dribbling ability stands. You see, we've seen Kaiser beat Rin when it comes to dueling. Sure, he did it once and Rin would decimate him otherwise, but that's still 1 feat above Sai. And of course, in terms of dueling, with the exception to Hugo, Lorenzo is definitely the best in the U20 category. And in fact, the fact that Kaiser was not able to do anything against Lorenzo and was able to do something against Berserker Rin is a testament to how far Lorenzo is when it comes to dueling. And I know what you might say, that's Kaiser post-awakening. However, you have to understand, Kaiser was always an insane duelist. Kaiser was always about that edgy life. And his awakening did not come in this form. Kaiser's awakening came in his ability to read the field, came in his ability to rid himself of emotions, and came in an insane improvement in his footwork. All three weapons that have nothing to do with Kaiser's dueling ability. And so when it comes to individually speaking, I'd rank Lorenzo as obviously the best, Kaiser as the second, and then, and I feel like he is a little bit far behind them, I have Sai. Sure, you could say that Sai maybe could dribble past Kaiser. However, I'd say that Kaiser has a better chance at stopping Sai than Sai's chance of stopping Kaiser in a duel. As we've seen, even someone as aggressive as Shido was not able to do anything to Kaiser. He was even holding both Tokimitsu and Karasu while shooting his shot. And this is what I'm talking about. Kaiser is an insane duelist. Yet he got completely decimated by Lorenzo one-on-one, and so obviously the winner is Lorenzo when it comes to individually speaking. However, you all know we are not talking about tennis here, we are talking about football. And being the best individually doesn't necessarily translate to being an insane player overall. And so how would these three fare when it comes to the overall assessment? Well, first let's actually talk about how Kaiser and Lorenzo's insane individual skill translate in terms of overall assessment. Now I feel like it's easier with Kaiser because we know he is insane overall. He is able to lead a team, he is able to play with Isigi, he is able to play with Hiyori, a midfielder he never played with before, and it's easy to understand why Kaiser is insane overall. However, Lorenzo is a bit tricky. A lot of people would say that he is individually great, but overall he is not that great. And I feel like that could not be furthest from the truth. Lorenzo was the beating heart of Ubers both on offense and on defense. The guy was literally the man that starts everything. Even when Snuffy joined in, even when the most broken pro joined in, the first player he always passed the ball to is the Don without question. Maybe sometimes Nico, but it feels like always Lorenzo. In fact, Isigi specifically noticed this. Sure, it sometimes starts with Nico, but like 95% of the times, it starts with Don Lorenzo. And that's not just on offense. If you think about it, even defensively. Sure, Lorenzo was always on Kaiser and he was individually great. But when Ubers were in a pitch, Lorenzo had no issue jumping in and intervening. And sure, he failed at that more than he was successful, but I feel like that's all due to his weakness and not necessarily because he is not great when it comes to the overall assessment. In fact, this ability of his to play perfectly in a team is exactly why he won against Rin in their matchup. Sure, Rin and Lorenzo are extremely good individually speaking. However, due to his stupid mentality in the NEL, Berserker Rin was extremely bad when we speak in overall. However, someone like Lorenzo was very good at playing in a team setting. In fact, he even shines sometimes, like I said, playing with Snuffy, Aryu, or Nico. But when it comes to Sai, I feel like if we just look at his performance in the U20 game, he does not stand a chance against Kaiser and Lorenzo. However, this is completely unfair. Sai was playing against toddlers, and a lot of the weapons that he used, we did not have a confirmation for them. You see, here's the thing, if Isigi did not tell us that Sai has metavision, we would definitely have speculated it, but it would have never been confirmed. And so I feel like it is unfair not to include Sai's potential, whom I feel like his potential is bigger than what the writer shown us in the U20 game. And so to fully decide who is the best, we are going to include Sai's full potential. Now, I gotta say, even if we include Sai's full potential, it is not easy to say who is the winner of this matchup. First, you have to understand, when it comes to versatility, both Kaiser and Lorenzo are far ahead of Sai. Sure, Sai could play as an extra striker if needs be, but he never really wanted that. He only did it out of necessity. However, the other two are a complete different story. Lorenzo is pretty obvious, he is the best midfielder and at the same time top 5 best playmaker. But even Kaiser, he is the best pure striker in the U20 category next to Isigi. At the same time, he is one of the best defenders we've seen in this show. And I don't want to hear any nonsense about how they are just perfectly positioning themselves, because that's specifically what Nico and Aiko are doing, and Kaiser and Isigi are doing it even better. And so in terms of versatility, Kaiser and Lorenzo completely stomp over Sai. Sure, we've seen Sai defend here and there, but his defending was actually not that good. He stopped Isigi from shooting, but it was not a complete dominance, and Isigi was still able to pass the ball to Rin. And so again, in terms of versatility, Sai is the worst. But what about Kaiser and Lorenzo? Who is more versatile? To be honest, it's kinda tricky to tell, because both players excel in their fields, and at the same time are very excellent in the secondary fields. However, if I gotta say, the fact that Lorenzo starts every Uber attack would give him a little bit of an edge over Kaiser's defending ability. And also in terms of versatility, I feel like the individual skill plays a huge role here. And so Lorenzo is slightly more versatile than Kaiser, and both are far more versatile than Sai. However, versatility is not the only argument towards being overall better. I feel like we need to address the weapons that each player have and the level of those weapons. And in this area specifically, full potential Sai completely stomps over Lorenzo and Kaiser. First, let's talk about Lorenzo and Kaiser. I feel like Kaiser here is a little bit better. Sure, before Lorenzo was able to stop the Kaiser impact, Lorenzo was able to decimate Kaiser in terms of footwork. But PXG Kaiser is a different breed, not only due to the Magnus technique, but also due to his awakening, which is actually the most interesting part about this matchup. How would post-awakening Kaiser fare against Lorenzo? Would he actually be able to beat him, and would he actually be able to score? Well, in terms of dueling, we know that he can't beat him, but in terms of footwork, I feel like Kaiser improved so much that he would definitely give a hard time to Lorenzo, and I feel like the latter would not be able to stop him a lot of times. Sure, most of the times Lorenzo would be able to swallow Kaiser entirely, but in a lot of other instances Kaiser would break free, especially because he is restriction type of eagle. And in fact, this is the biggest argument to why Lorenzo would not be able to keep Kaiser on a leash for a whole game, specifically because his restriction would only fuel Kaiser. He would stop him most of the times, but he would fail in stopping him a lot of times as well. And this is without me actually getting into the Magnus technique. Sure, Lorenzo could stop the Kaiser impact, but if you add the Magnus technique, what would Lorenzo even do? Would he be able to read that if Kaiser is shooting normally or if it is the Magnus technique? I mean, Isigi said that it was 50-50 chance, but as a defender, 50-50 chance from a guaranteed goal is actually really bad. And so I feel like Kaiser improved a lot for Lorenzo to be still better than him. And here's my final verdict between these two, and when we talk overall, I feel like they are on the same league, but Kaiser is definitely better. Not by a huge margin, and Lorenzo would still stomp over him most of the times, but because he is restriction and because of the Magnus technique, Kaiser would actually have high chances of scoring when he is free from Lorenzo. And again, if you remember, Aiko stopped Isigi a lot of times, but only failing to stop him 3 times resulted in all the goals scored by Bastard. And that's what I'm talking about. Even though I feel like Lorenzo would be able to stop Kaiser more than he could not. The fact that he would give those chances to Kaiser is actually a death sentence to his team. And so due to this, I feel like Kaiser is better than Lorenzo. It is not a huge margin, but Kaiser is slightly better than Lorenzo for sure. However, what about Kaiser and Lorenzo against full potential Sai? Now, to be honest, it is a little bit tricky because talking about potential is always ambiguous. However, from the weapons that I speculated Sai has, I definitely see him overall better than both Kaiser and Lorenzo. Maybe not by a huge margin, and they could close the gap very soon. But I feel like he is definitely better than both. I think in an overall setting, Sai's weapons and abilities would give him the best performance among the 3. I feel like his ability to understand and push his strikers, his ability to deliver perfectly tailored passes to the strikers would enable him to be actually more successful in any given team compared to the other 2. But also me speculating that Sai has the fastest piece is also a testament to why he is better than Kaiser specifically. Because that's how Isigi was able to beat the German Emperor, and that's how Isigi was able to connect with Ness, something that Kaiser was not able to do. And the confirmation for that is the fact that Sai was actually called up to be a pro. Well, technically he was not called up because the Spanish regulations would not allow it, but if the regulations weren't there, much like Bunny, he would be playing with the pros. And in my eyes, being scouted to be a pro is definitely one of the best feats any player has. And so as my final verdict, and when including full potential, we have Sai as the winner, Kaiser and then Lorenzo. The difference between the 3 isn't that huge, but the difference between Sai and Kaiser is much bigger than the difference between Kaiser and Lorenzo. And actually I have a final argument that would confirm this placement. You see, even if you say that Kaiser, Lorenzo and Sai are all on the same level, their mentalities alone would give the edge to Sai. As I said, me speculating that Sai has the fastest piece and has the mentality for it dictates that he is better than Kaiser. And in the case of Lorenzo, he actually has a weakness unlike Kaiser and Sai who don't. And so that weakness would take him a little bit down. I know I said I am including full potential, and full potential Lorenzo would get rid of this weakness. However, unlike the potential of Sai which has seeds, we don't have any confirmation for Lorenzo. But as it stands, the winner is definitely Sai, Kaiser is second, and slightly behind Kaiser is Lorenzo. However, that's all I've got for you today guys. I really hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, thank you for watching.